Every morning, we rise from our beds, some with energy, others with stiffness in the joints, a dull ache in the lower back, or a mind still clouded by fatigue. For many seniors, these are not just signs of aging. They are signals. Signals that something deeper, quieter, and more persistent is happening beneath the surface. Our kidneys, the body's silent filters, are under stress. Kidneys are among the most vital organs in the human body. They work 24/7 to filter waste, regulate fluids, balance minerals, and support blood pressure. But as we age, their efficiency naturally declines. For some, that decline is subtle. For others, it becomes a daily struggle, especially if chronic kidney disease, CKD, has already begun to take root. One of the earliest, and most alarming, indicators of kidney stress is elevated creatinine levels in the blood. Creatinine is a waste product that healthy kidneys filter easily. But when kidney function dips, it starts to build up, silently affecting everything from energy and circulation to heart health, bone strength, and brain clarity. Yet there's hope. And that hope doesn't begin in a pill bottle or hospital bed. It begins in the kitchen, with a cup. Yes, a simple, thoughtfully chosen morning drink can make a world of difference. These aren't magical potions. They're gentle allies, each with their own natural properties: hydration, detoxification, anti-inflammation, circulation enhancement, and mineral balance. Taken daily, they nourish the kidneys, ease their burden, and gently help flush out toxins, including excess creatinine. But more than that, they empower you. Because what you choose to put into your body, first thing in the morning, can set the tone for your whole day and your whole future. In this guide, you'll discover the 12 most effective morning drinks for seniors looking to support their kidneys naturally, the science behind how each drink works, tips to prepare them safely and deliciously, common mistakes to avoid, like hidden sugar, high potassium, or artificial ingredients. Bonus: kidney-friendly morning habits that work hand in hand with your drinks. This is not just a list. It's a journey of healing, for your kidneys, your energy, and your independence. Whether you've been diagnosed with CKD, are at risk, or simply want to take better care of your body as it ages, this is for you. So take a deep breath. Pour yourself a cup of water. And let's begin the most important sip of your day. 1. Why kidney health matters after 60. The organ that quietly keeps you alive. It doesn't beat like the heart. It doesn't rise and fall like the lungs. You can't feel it digesting like the stomach. And yet, your kidneys, those two small, bean-shaped organs near your lower back, are working harder than almost any other part of your body, every second of your life. They filter your blood, remove waste, balance your body's fluids, manage pH levels, regulate your blood pressure, and even support the health of your bones and brain. They don't ask for much. But when they begin to fail, they affect everything. The invisible decline, aging and kidney function. After age 60, kidney function naturally declines. It's not always dramatic, but it is constant. Studies show that on average, you lose 1% of kidney function per year after 50. At first, there are no symptoms. But slowly, quietly, your kidneys may begin to struggle. Excess creatinine builds up in your blood. You retain more water, feel bloated or puffy. Toxins aren't filtered efficiently. Your blood pressure rises. Your energy falls. Your bones weaken. Your memory dims. Many people don't realize they have kidney disease until it's advanced, because the symptoms are subtle and often blamed on just getting older. But this is not just aging. It's a filtering system in distress, and you can do something about it. Understanding creatinine, the waste that warns you. Creatinine is a natural waste product created by your muscles during activity. In a healthy body, it's filtered out by the kidneys and excreted through urine. But when kidney function declines, creatinine builds up in your blood. High creatinine levels are like a check engine light. They don't mean your kidneys have failed, but they do mean they're working harder than they should, and that something needs to change. Here's the empowering part. Creatinine levels can often be lowered naturally, not through drugs or drastic diets, but through consistent hydration, gentle detoxification, and smart nutritional choices. And one of the simplest ways to start that process? What you drink first thing in the morning. The morning advantage. Why your first drink of the day matters most. When you wake up, your body is in a fasted state. Your kidneys have been working all night, filtering blood and processing waste. Your hydration levels are low. Your detox pathways are open and ready. What you give your body in the first 30 to 60 minutes sets the tone for everything that follows. Hydration improves blood flow and filtration. Anti-inflammatory compounds reduce kidney stress. Natural diuretics help flush out creatinine and toxins. Antioxidants protect kidney cells from damage. Balanced minerals prevent overload of potassium or phosphorus. Imagine each morning drink as a message to your kidneys. I'm here to support you today. You don't need expensive cleanses. You need the right cup at the right time. The kidney, heart, brain connection. Why should seniors pay attention to kidney health, even if they feel okay? Because kidney function is directly linked to heart disease risk, cognitive decline and dementia, bone density and fracture risk, immune strength and inflammation, quality of sleep, mood and energy. In short, when the kidneys falter, everything else follows. And when you support them, everything else improves. Your morning ritual is your medicine. So let's change how we think about the morning. It's not just the start of your day. It's the starting point of your healing. Before the pills, the appointments, the lab results. Before breakfast, news, or emails. There is a moment where you make a decision. Will today be another day of stress, dehydration, and decline? Or will today be a small act of healing? One cup. One quiet choice. That's all it takes to begin. 2. The 12 best morning drinks for seniors. Nature's gentle detoxifiers. Every morning offers a small yet powerful opportunity to heal. For seniors, especially those managing chronic kidney disease or elevated creatinine levels, the first drink of the day can serve as a message to the body. You are choosing life, nourishment, and renewal. What follows are 12 of the most effective, accessible, and natural morning drinks that support kidney function, reduce toxin load, and gently assist in lowering creatinine levels. Each drink plays a unique role, and none require expensive supplements or extreme preparation. They are simple, whole, and time-tested. We begin with the most basic yet vital of all: water. Upon waking, your body is naturally dehydrated and your kidneys have worked through the night, filtering your blood and concentrating urine. Drinking a glass of room-temperature water first thing in the morning helps to rehydrate your system, enhance blood flow to the kidneys, and promote the excretion of accumulated waste such as creatinine. For many seniors, this simple act of drinking water is the foundation of kidney support. While 2 liters per day is a common recommendation, individual needs vary, especially for those with advanced CKD, so it is important to balance hydration without overburdening compromised kidneys. Next, soy milk emerges as a powerful plant-based alternative to dairy for those concerned about kidney health. Unlike cow's milk, which is often high in phosphorus and saturated fat, soy milk provides protein that is easier on the kidneys, along with beneficial isoflavones and antioxidants. A small serving of unsweetened soy milk in the morning can be incorporated into a smoothie, taken with a light breakfast, or enjoyed on its own. Its moderate potassium content makes it a safe and nourishing option for many seniors, especially those needing to limit certain minerals. Contrary to common concerns, coffee, when consumed in moderation, can support kidney health. Rich in antioxidants and known for its role in reducing inflammation, black coffee has been associated with a lower risk of CKD progression in several studies. Seniors can enjoy 1 or 2 cups of plain, unsweetened coffee in the morning, preferably without creamers or sugar that might spike insulin or burden the kidneys. Its gentle diuretic effect can support waste elimination, though it should be balanced with proper hydration and tailored to each individual's tolerance to caffeine. Green tea stands as one of the most revered beverages in traditional medicine, and for good reason. Loaded with catechins, a powerful class of antioxidants, green tea helps to reduce oxidative stress and inflammation in the kidneys. A warm cup of freshly steeped green tea each morning can gently stimulate kidney filtration, calm the nervous system, and provide a grounding start to the day. Using loose leaves and steeping for just 2 to 3 minutes helps preserve its delicate compounds, making it both therapeutic and enjoyable. Cranberry juice is widely known for its role in urinary tract health, but it also offers benefits for the kidneys. It helps prevent bacteria from adhering to the urinary tract lining, reducing the risk of infections that can inflame or stress the kidneys. For seniors, a small glass of pure, unsweetened cranberry juice in the morning can act as both a preventative and supportive measure. However, attention should be paid to potassium content and overall sugar intake, especially for those managing diabetes or advanced CKD. Lemon water offers a bright, refreshing, and health-promoting start to the day. Rich in vitamin C and citric acid, it supports hydration, boosts immunity, and may help prevent kidney stone formation. Drinking a glass of warm or room-temperature lemon water first thing in the morning aids in flushing out toxins and encouraging gentle detoxification. For seniors with acid sensitivity or GERD, however, it's wise to monitor how the body responds and consult a healthcare provider if discomfort arises. Acai juice, made from the deep purple Amazonian berry, has gained popularity for its antioxidant potency. For aging kidneys, the anti-inflammatory and cellular protective effects of acai can provide meaningful support. When consumed in the form of unsweetened juice or powder mixed with water, acai helps reduce oxidative stress, a key factor in kidney cell damage. Seniors should ensure they're choosing pure, additive-free sources to maximize benefits and minimize unnecessary sugar intake. Red grape juice is another nutrient-rich beverage that contributes to kidney wellness. Containing resveratrol and flavonoids, it helps reduce inflammation, protect vascular integrity, and support blood flow to the kidneys. Homemade red grape juice, blended from fresh grapes without added sugar, is preferable, as it preserves polyphenol content and avoids the pitfalls of processed drinks. A small morning portion can be part of a broader anti-inflammatory routine for kidney protection. Blueberry juice is a gentle and kidney-friendly option, especially valuable for its low levels of potassium, sodium, and phosphorus. Blueberries are high in antioxidants and have been shown to reduce inflammation while supporting cognitive and cardiovascular health. For seniors looking to ease the strain on their kidneys, a half cup of fresh blueberry juice in the morning is both safe and beneficial. Making it at home from whole fruit preserves fiber and maximizes nutritional value. Ginger tea provides a warming, circulation-boosting, and detoxifying start to the day. Known for its anti-inflammatory and diuretic properties, ginger can enhance urine output and help clear excess creatinine. Steeping fresh ginger slices in hot water for 10 minutes creates a soothing tea that not only supports the kidneys but also aids digestion, reduces nausea, and calms inflammation throughout the body. It's particularly helpful during colder months or when the body feels sluggish. Morina tea, derived from the nutrient-dense leaves of the morina tree, is a lesser-known but powerful tonic for kidney health. Rich in antioxidants, vitamins, and anti-inflammatory compounds, morina tea helps to reduce toxin buildup and support natural creatinine clearance. 1 cup in the morning, perhaps enhanced with lemon or ginger, can serve as a revitalizing and medicinal drink that supports multiple aspects of senior health. Finally, cucumber water combines hydration with the natural cooling and anti-inflammatory effects of cucumbers. This simple infusion helps increase urine production, flush toxins, and soothe internal tissues. Preparing cucumber water by soaking fresh slices overnight in cool water allows the body to absorb its subtle minerals and phytochemicals. For seniors who struggle with plain water intake, cucumber water is a flavorful and kidney-friendly alternative that encourages better hydration and daily detox. Together, these 12 drinks form a toolkit, a set of daily rituals that support not just kidney function, but overall vitality, energy, and peace of mind. By incorporating even 1 or 2 of them into the morning routine, seniors can begin a gentle, empowering journey toward better health, 1 sip at a time. 3. Morning habits to support kidney function beyond the cup. As powerful as these drinks are, they become even more effective when paired with simple, intentional morning habits. For seniors, building a routine that supports kidney health means engaging not just with what you consume, but also with how you move, breathe, and think. Morning is a natural time for these habits to flourish, offering a quiet space before the day becomes busy, where healing and connection to the body can happen most easily. One of the most impactful habits to begin the day is gentle movement. This could be light stretching, a short walk, or a few minutes of chair yoga. Movements such as forward folds, side stretches, or seated twists gently increase blood flow to the abdominal region, enhancing kidney perfusion and relieving physical stagnation from a night's rest. In addition to physical benefits, this movement helps release cortisol and elevate mood, both important for managing the emotional weight of chronic conditions. Equally vital is a focus on breath. Deep breathing not only calms the nervous system but also improves oxygenation of the blood, which is essential for all organs, including the kidneys. Seniors may benefit from simple techniques like diaphragmatic breathing or box breathing, where you inhale, hold, exhale, and hold again, all for equal counts. Practicing even 5 minutes of intentional breathing each morning can reduce systemic inflammation and prepare the body for the day's activities. Starting the day with mindfulness also plays a critical role. Whether through meditation, prayer, journaling, or simple reflection, taking a few moments to connect mentally and emotionally grounds the day in purpose and calm. Research shows that stress plays a significant role in worsening kidney disease, as chronic cortisol elevation increases inflammation and impairs immune regulation. A morning gratitude practice, for example, has been linked to reduced markers of inflammation and improved cardiovascular function. Nutrition should also be part of the morning equation. In addition to a kidney-supporting drink, including small servings of antioxidant-rich, low-potassium foods such as blueberries, red grapes, apples, or cabbage can provide a nutrient-dense beginning. These foods contain polyphenol and vitamins that combat oxidative stress, one of the leading contributors to kidney cell aging. Keeping breakfast light yet nourishing ensures that digestion supports rather than competes with your body's natural detox efforts. Finally, exposure to natural morning sunlight supports circadian rhythm and vitamin D synthesis. Just 10 to 15 minutes of natural light early in the day helps regulate sleep-wake cycles, boosts mood, and indirectly supports kidney health by improving hormonal balance and calcium metabolism. Seniors who are able to sit by a window or step outside in the morning, even briefly, gain not just physical benefits, but also a deeper sense of connection to the rhythms of life. Together, these habits create a comprehensive approach to kidney wellness. When paired with the healing power of natural drinks, they form a morning ritual that nourishes the body, uplifts the mind, and fortifies the spirit. This is not about perfection, but about small, consistent actions that, over time, make a significant difference. For seniors navigating the complexities of kidney health, such a routine is not only possible, it is profoundly empowering. 4. A long-term path. Tips for success and sustainability. Creating a sustainable kidney-friendly routine doesn't require perfection, but it does demand patience, flexibility, and a little bit of daily intention. For seniors, the most effective habits are not necessarily those that promise dramatic changes overnight, but rather the ones that can be practiced consistently without creating overwhelm. In this chapter, we will explore practical tips to ensure that the knowledge from earlier sections becomes a lasting part of your lifestyle, something that feels not only manageable but rewarding. One of the key principles to remember is that small steps build long roads. Begin with one drink, one habit, or one small change. If you've never drunk lemon water in the morning, start there. If you feel more confident adding gentle stretches to your routine, make that your first step. Once this new habit becomes part of your rhythm, layer another. Over time, these small acts form a tapestry of support that reinforces kidney function naturally and gently. Listening to your body is another essential practice. While all the drinks and habits discussed are safe for most seniors, individual health conditions may require personalized adjustments. For example, if you experience acid reflux, lemon water might not be ideal. If your potassium levels are elevated, you may need to monitor intake of certain juices more carefully. Always observe how your body responds, and when in doubt, consult with a healthcare provider or registered dietitian who understands kidney health. Another critical success factor is variety with structure. The body thrives on nutrients from diverse sources, and the same principle applies to kidney-supportive drinks and foods. Rotating between green tea, moringa tea, or cucumber water can keep your routine fresh and engaging while ensuring a broad intake of helpful compounds. At the same time, maintaining a core schedule, drinking water upon waking, for instance, or having a light antioxidant-rich breakfast, creates the structure your body needs to feel balanced. Staying informed without becoming overwhelmed is also important. The field of kidney health, like all areas of medicine, is constantly evolving. While it's useful to stay updated, try not to chase every new trend or miracle product. Focus on timeless principles: hydration, anti-inflammatory nutrition, stress management, and gentle movement. These are not fads. They are the foundation of well-being for kidneys and the body as a whole. Equally valuable is finding joy and meaning in your routine. Choose teas you enjoy the taste of. Create rituals that soothe your spirit. Drink your morning infusion while listening to music, reading a few lines of poetry, or simply looking out the window and watching the sunrise. When habits are infused with comfort and beauty, they become easier to maintain, and far more nourishing. Social support can also play a big role in success. Share your morning drink routine with a friend, or join an online group of people on similar wellness journeys. Discuss your goals with your family or caregivers so they can support you with encouragement and practical help. Sometimes, simply having someone ask, "Did you do your breathing today?" can be enough to stay on track. Finally, be gentle with yourself. There may be days when you forget your tea, skip your stretches, or don't feel like preparing fresh juice. That's okay. Progress is not linear, and healing is not a race. What matters is the direction you're heading, not the occasional misstep. Each morning is a new invitation to begin again. By approaching your kidney wellness journey with patience, personal awareness, and a sense of peace, you can transform these small daily acts into a long-term foundation for vitality. This chapter is a reminder that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers quietly, cup by cup, breath by breath, step by gentle step. 5. Reflections and real-life stories. A journey shared. No journey toward better health is ever taken alone. While the path to supporting kidney function may be deeply personal, it is also one walked by millions of others. Seniors, caregivers, families, and communities, each navigating their own challenges and small victories. In this final chapter, we reflect on the shared nature of healing and the quiet strength that can be found in everyday stories. Consider Margaret, a 72-year-old retiree who was diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease. At first, she was overwhelmed by the medical terms, dietary changes, and fear of losing her independence. But she started simple: lemon water each morning. Then she added a 5-minute walk. Then green tea. 6 months later, her creatinine levels had stabilized, her energy had returned, and she had developed a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. What began as a fear-driven change had become a gentle, life-affirming rhythm. Or think of Roberto, a 68-year-old former construction worker who lived with diabetes and high blood pressure. After a health scare landed him in the hospital, he began reading about kidney-friendly habits and decided to commit to small daily actions. He swapped his sugary coffee for ginger tea, started stretching with his grandson in the mornings, and learned how to prepare cucumber water with mint from his garden. His new routine didn't just improve his kidney markers, it gave him something even more precious: connection, joy, and purpose. These are not stories of overnight transformation. They are reminders that even when change is slow, it is meaningful. That even the smallest choice, to choose tea over soda, to walk instead of sit, to breathe deeply rather than rush, can ripple outward, influencing not only our health but our mindset and relationships. This journey is also one of rediscovery. Many seniors, through the simple act of adopting a morning ritual, report a newfound sense of ownership over their bodies and lives. They feel less like passive recipients of care and more like engaged participants in their own wellness. They reconnect with their breath, their senses, their mornings, and in doing so, with themselves. There is no perfect path. Kidney health is not a finish line but a process, marked by listening, adjusting, forgiving, and trying again. It is a relationship with the body, renewed each morning by the choices we make and the care we give. It is a form of love, quiet, deliberate, enduring. To every reader who has followed this guide, know that your steps matter. Whether you begin with a single glass of water or embrace a full morning practice, you are building something real. You are protecting the organs that protect you. You are honoring your life. So let this not be the end of a book, but the beginning of a deeper practice. One that begins at sunrise, one sip and breath at a time, and carries you gently forward with grace. Your morning is not just a routine. It is your return to wholeness. Your journey continues, stronger, clearer, kinder than ever before.